Now, I've been looking forward to the next session on the future of leadership in business and sports because I'll be sitting with a fellow Brit who's really not afraid to tell it like it is. I called him about a week or so ago to connect with him, and prior to this session, I said, so we're going to talk about entrepreneurship, leadership, inspiration, offer some wisdom to young people business people in the room. He said, nah, let's talk about my football club. Who am I to argue? He is, after all, Leyton Orient, of which he's chairman, is London's second oldest football club, and its fans know Leyton Orient by its nickname, the O's, which is particularly ironic because O is the shape of a donut, and this distinguished gentleman is chairman of Dunkin' Donuts, the best-known company, Dunkin' Brands. He was actually CEO until July this year and before becoming chairman, and has had a notable past as a top executive with Burger King, that's also an O shape, I guess, Papa John's, pizzas, and Blockbuster, rest in peace. Maybe I'm pushing my luck thinking of videotape loops. Anyway, I'm sensing a theme here. Please give a very warm welcome to Nigel Travis. Let's see.
That's very good.
Come, grab a seat. You're actually also on the board of Advanced Auto Parts.
I am.
Auto, if you say it loud, there's an O in it too. I'm very worried.
Yeah, you're going to have me looking at O's now.
I know. I've got to ask you, have you ever been an entrepreneur?
Yes, I have. I mean, so I had an interesting experience, which I've relayed once before at Babson, that when I was about 16, my voice hadn't broken. And that was a big obstacle to overcome. And it eventually broke, and I started using it a lot. I got into soccer coaching very young, been coaching soccer for 50 years. And when I got to university, I was very interested in music on the back of the pirate radio that existed in the UK. We didn't, it's amazing to most Americans that we didn't have commercial radio in the 1960s. And then we had all these ships out in the North Sea pumping out American radio. So I was very enthusiastic being in the 60s, and I went to college and I became a disc jockey. And it all went very well. I played all the latest pop. I didn't play the latest trendy music that was usually played at college. And I became a disc jockey, and I called it corporate sound. And it sounded a really big organization. And when people phoned up and said, have you got a unit available to come and do a wedding or something like that, I'd say, hang on. I'd go away, come back and say, yeah, we got one unit available that night. So I learned a lot being an entrepreneur in those days, and I did it for 20 years.
Fantastic. Now, interestingly enough, a couple of years ago, you became chairman of Leyton Orient, the club I was mentioning earlier. But you had a 60-year passion for that club, very faithful following. How much of a change has there been in sports culture? I mean, Leyton Orient, all those decades ago, would have been a very different place, and the way it was run would have been very different. The whole culture of sports has changed. How much have you seen that change, or how much have you followed that change?
Well, I mean, inevitably it's changed, and I think sports is changing probably it can't change at the same kind of pace as we've just heard in our previous speaker. And by the way, as someone who's 69, I totally agree with what you said, because I spend every day involved in different activities and trying to learn. But sports is changing at a rate that I don't think most businesses are changing. It's going from what is in front of the spectator to what is in front of the screen. I mean, we're a fairly small London club. We have been in the top league. We went up with Liverpool in 1961-2. They stayed up. We came down after 1 year. But it's all about pushing out the brand globally. And to support that, this year we've done soccer camps, not only here in Massachusetts, in New York, India, and Denmark. I mean, so it's about a global brand, but to support that global brand, it's become very much what's on the screen. And linking to the screen, the amount of analytics in sport is incredible. And I think we've only just started. And it's not just about the players' heart rates or their blood pressure or how far they run. It's about how they run, where they run. And we truly run Leyton Orient like I run Dunkin'. It's into the detail. The previous speaker talked about digital. Digital is so important to us. And it's about making those fans come back, not only because we're successful, but marketing to them, which is really something that's never happened before. So I think there's an awful lot going on in sports. I truly think, actually, sports can teach business something. I mean, you think about it. In sports, this week, Riz, you're in the team. Next week, you're out the team. I have to talk to you why you're not in the team. And I think those skills certainly have helped me through the years. But I think as we move to a business world where soft skills, based on what we've just heard, are very important, I think that's the kind of skills we need to train people in, because most people can't communicate like that.
No, but I wonder, has sport lost the raw emotion? Once it gets into analytics and technology and marketing, the commercialism of it, to what degree is it losing the emotional aspect? Just guys going out there kicking a football, for example, or now women going out there kicking a football and enjoying the sport of it, as opposed to all the nuances behind running it?
Well, I live here in Wellesley and I coach here in Wellesley. And I think we're managing to incorporate the two. And I think at Leighton Orient Football Club, there are some clubs, Brentford, which is a club near where you were brought up. They are very strongly into analytics. We try and marry the two, but that's obviously at a professional level. I think one of the things you've got to do, you've got to find ways to encourage kids to enjoy sports. And I had a debate as recently as last night about that. And people always talk about skills. To me, the biggest element in sports is how do you put kids in a situation where they leave feeling confident. It's about confidence more than anything else.
Due to the changes that we're discussing here, has the type of manager needed, the type of people who are leading the sports and running it and managing it, have the requirements changed up there? Do they have to have different skill sets?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's kind of amazing. I mean, I always remember going on a very senior football coaching course back in 1976. And there was a very famous football manager called Brian Clough. I'm sure you remember, some of the people here may not. And I remember I actually roomed with a very famous English player called Ian Storey-Moore. And I said, so what was Brian Clough like? He said, well, he didn't know anything about tactics. He came in, he swore and shouted at the players and told them to go out and play. Okay. I mean, that doesn't exist anymore. It's about detailed tactics. It's about how the other team plays, how you react to it, how you can build on your strengths. It's very much like you use in business. So that's why I think the two are coming together. So the raw, just get out there and do it, has gone away. And I think it's very analytically produced. But I think it's also, if you build in the fact that we're talking about sports where we're very focused on fitness, we're focused on wellness, that's really made players today so much better than they've ever been before.
The players will always have good days and bad days, and if the analytics put them in the bad day phase as so and so, the impact on their playing would be, there would be an impact on their playing. So has everything gone short term now as a result? So if one has a bad day, it's kind of a dreadful situation.
I don't think so, but I think one of the trends in sports we all have to worry about is what do people do after sports? I mean, I think the average NFL player lasts, 4 years? In soccer, it's probably longer. It's probably about 12, 13 years. And one of the things that we try and do at Leighton Orient is to make sure that we continually talk to our players about how they're going to have life after football. I mean, most of them, their career finishes at 33, 32, 33. What are they going to do after that? And to me, that's a key question. So, and again, going back to the previous presentation, I think it's fascinating. A player I spoke to in the summer, I said, well, what have you done about life after football? And he said, well, I've done 2 years of counting. I'm not sure whether I want to continue. I encouraged him to do it. I probably should have encouraged him a bit more to look at the soft skills. But I don't think it's becoming short term. I actually think, most of the clubs are beginning to take very good care of people. And I think knowing the Patriots very well, knowing the Red Sox very well, and the people who run them, I think there is a much stronger caring environment for players than there was many years ago.
Now, journalists, I mean, knowing my industry, journalists make terrible managers, absolutely awful. And unfortunately, they're the ones who float up, the worst ones float up to the management sector, because largely we draw from within to put those people at the top. They don't have the management skills. They just don't. It's the nature of the journalists generally nitpicky and everything. With sportsmen, you see a lot of sports people ending up in management as well. Do they just generally have the kind of leadership skills needed, or is it just because they know the sport?
Well, actually, that's a really interesting question. When I took my major coaching qualification, that one in 1976, there was a qualification you had to go through about whether you could play the game. That's totally gone away. So we have people who've become very successful coaches, and a good example is Jose Mourinho, who obviously coached at Chelsea, Inter Milan, and Real Madrid and Manchester United. I mean, he didn't play at a high level at all. And I think there's a lot of coaches now who've come through. I mean, there's a coach in the lower leagues who's done very well. He actually was a salesperson. He then started coaching a Sunday team, and now he's coaching a League One team. I was talking to his boss, the chairman, as recently as this week. So I think it's actually broadening, and I think it's broadened as people become a little bit more analytical. The use of video in sports is fantastic, and I think one of the things that was always very powerful in my days as a HR professional, which was the first 20 years of my life, is using video in training people, in interviewing, how to terminate people, how to counsel people, all those things that managers need to do on a regular basis.
Sounds horrible, terminate people as opposed to terminate their jobs.
No, sometimes you have to terminate people because they don't actually perform. And I think that goes back to that link. How do you explain to people they're not meeting the expectations? And you need to explain how you go from there, which is not so good, to there, which is good.
Sticking with the theme of sports, the tools that are available now, the technology, the analytics, as you say, have changed things dramatically. To what degree has that changed the opportunities for players? I mean, someone who is given a certain type of training might reach their potential more easily than someone in the old days. It was just get out there and play. With the right kind of analytics, someone can be brought up to their maximum potential, whereas they might have not been up there before. How much is that kind of changing the kind of people who are rising to the top of the sports?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and I think it gets to a central issue about what happens in US sports. US sports is unique in many ways. I mean, I could go through a whole list of uniqueness. I mean, one is you have the draft system, which I think we all find exciting. Most athletes go to college. We have leagues that don't have promotion and relegation. They are all typically unique in the US. Everyone in the UK cannot believe that teams like the Miami Dolphins this year, who are deliberately tanking, aren't relegated. By the way, complete omission. I support the Miami Dolphins because first time I came to America, I lived in Miami, so I want sympathy from everyone, right? So in football, you couldn't do that. If you take League One last year, 11 teams the week before the end of the season could have gone down to League Two. So that's the first thing. I think when you consider that US sports don't have that, I think what's happening is that they are focused very much on survival. In football, I think we've grown over the years to think about how we can get better. And I think what that does, it draws people up through the leagues because every league is competitive. So I think it's a lot of examples to your question about people who've started in non-league football and have gone up the equivalent of 5 leagues very quickly because people have seen their potential and worked on it.
What is the change in media, the way people are able to access sports now, mobile devices, digital devices, and so on? What is that doing to the urge people might normally have to go out and see a match live? Has that changed things much?
I think, as I said before, it's actually fascinating. I think it goes both ways. So now in the UK, you can actually watch all our games for midweek only, every game. So Tuesday night we played at home. You could see that game by streaming. That is new in the last 2 years. If you're in the US or anywhere else internationally, and we have viewers in Australia, India, all over the world. I think it's 39 countries. You can watch every game on a weekend, and you can see every game. But it's restricted on a Saturday, actually by European football regulations, that we can't stream them on a Saturday. So I think the access to sports has grown dramatically. Social media has definitely built up the excitement. I remember when I first came to Miami and lived in Miami, and I wanted the Leyton Orient score, my dad used to fax it to me. This was in 1989. Now I can follow it by streaming, I can follow it on Twitter, which is probably the fastest and best way, actually. So social media, I think, has built up the excitement. But it's also made it very difficult for owners because you get constant feedback from fans. And having worked in the franchising business with Dunkin', there's two Fs that are very similar. Franchisees and fans, they're all highly opinionated. And you get constant feedback, which, by the way, I don't think is bad. I think it's good. And one of the things I think I've become well known for at the club is you can say whatever you want to me because we want the feedback. And sometimes I don't actually like it, but I've encouraged people to give me that constant feedback.
I'm going to move off sports in a moment, but I do want to get on to how, what you just talked about, the availability of the content. I remember, for example, in the news industry, if we didn't have any access to the broadcasting rights, we were doing sports news with still pictures, which just doesn't have the excitement. People would be watching a photograph of a footballer in action or whatever, and it would be done like that as opposed to actual video and stuff. How much has the demand from the fans changed that? I mean, people are not going to watch just photographs of sports anymore.
It's interesting you say that. After every game, we do what's known as a gallery, and that's very popular.
Okay.
Because what we've managed to do in the pictures, it isn't just the game, it's the fans. So if you go to an away game, you might have your picture and that. So I think that's a way of engaging the fans. But I think one of the interesting elements of sport is now right at the crossroads to the future of broadcasting. I mean, if anyone's read the press this week, we've had all the discussion about AT&T, should they spin off DirecTV? And if you go back to when I was at Blockbuster, okay, God rest its soul.
There is one left, I gather, in Australia or somewhere.
No, there is one left in Oregon.
Oregon.
So we introduced DirecTV, and DirecTV was driven on the Sunday ticket, right? How many people here got the Sunday ticket out of interest? Yeah, a few of us, okay. Well, the Sunday ticket drove to DirecTV, and then there was Dish. People thought that satellite TV was going to kill cable TV. I mean, you were in cable. That was the belief. Well, cable and satellite are now under threat by streaming. And I was listening to CNBC yesterday, and they said there is actually 6 streaming services out there, and if you subscribe to them all, you would actually pay about $70 a month. And people are not going to do that. What is interesting is if you want to see live TV, what is the thing people want? Sports. Okay. So I think we're about to see a pitched battle between the big networks in this country, NBC, CBS, ABC, and the people like Facebook, Google, Amazon. And I think this is really going to support sports of all kinds, because that's going to bring in dramatically higher revenue streams, because you're not going to have the big networks fighting for broadcasting rights. You're going to have these mega media companies, and they know that people want to watch the game wherever they are. I mean, it's interesting. We had a discussion at the club this morning that sometimes when I coach my daughter's team, we kick off at 9 o'clock. The Leyton Orient games kick off at 10. So I go to the coach, I then come home, I'm driving, can I listen to the game, and then when I get home, watch it on streaming? Said, no one's ever asked that question before. The answer is you can. And that's how people's lives are going to change. People are going to mix up their lives in a way we've never seen. They will want to listen to games, see games. They will want to go out shopping and watch the game as they go on their phone. So I think the future of sports is fantastic, because I think it's truly right at the heart of the future of TV.
If satellite ever reaches Oregon, will that Blockbuster close?
Satellite has reached Oregon, and one of the saddest things to me is the whole demise of Blockbuster, which we could sit and talk about. But it's interesting that Charlie Ergen, who I see every year, who's the founder, CEO, and chairman, I think, of Dish, he owns the brand name to Blockbuster, and I'll make a prophecy here that one day that name will come back, but I think it will be very strongly associated with over the top, which is what the technical term for all these streaming devices, over the top and linked with movies.
So funny, we had Video Killed the Radio Star by the Buggles, and there's not been any follow-up about what killed video. So a quick thing now.
Netflix.
You talked about how there is a lot of commonality between what you're doing with sports as chairman of Leighton and your work with Duncan Brand and so on. Where do you see that synergy in leadership? Is there a lot more in common than most people would have expected between managing in sports and managing in regular business, if you like, retail business even?
Well, I lead the perfect life. I mean, I'm retired. So what does that mean? I don't go to an office. That's a huge check. I mean, going to an office is one of the worst things you ever have to do. Think about all that commuting that one does. I don't have to manage franchisees and I don't have to worry about sales. So that's the definition of retirement. But now I've got this wonderful opportunity where I'm learning non-stop and I'm experiencing 4 public boards. So the great opportunity is to learn across all these boards. I also chairman of a private company, a disruptor, which is really fun, and then the football club. So back on your question, the similarity is amazing. Yeah. We look at finances, we look at people, but I think the biggest thing is people. Now, I'm going to say that because I've got a human resources background, but to me, it comes back to how well you manage people, how well you motivate them, how well you give them the leadership vision of where you're going in the future. And just come back to Duncan. Duncan has transitioned over the years. We started, as the old name said, because we're just Duncan now, we used to just sell donuts. Then we sold donuts and coffee. And over time, it transitioned. Coffee came in. Beverages, which is more than coffee, is now over 60% of our revenue. We then bought in sandwiches over time. So it's a constant transition. As I've already explained, I think sports is a constant transition. And indeed, when I go on my other boards, Office Depot, which is fighting Amazon, back to your point, constantly. Advanced Auto Parts, we're in an industry there where we've got another 2 major competitors, AutoZone and O'Reilly. So highly competitive business. And then Abercrombie & Fitch, which is also in another very competitive retail space. It's the quality of the people and the speed that you react. And going back to the gentleman from Microsoft, the big differentiator, in my view, besides people, is how well you incorporate the digital age, because that's the ultimate convenience that consumers want.
So let's get to the concept of entrepreneurship and how it might change things. As you explained, you had your stint as an entrepreneur, as a disc jockey. How much do you see the ability of young people and their energy and their kind of ideas to really change things in a positive way? How important do you see it to be?
Well, I'm very optimistic. I mean, despite my age, my wife and my wife's sitting over there, so she'll be editing what I said. She and I are very optimistic about our kids who are 14 and 12, that they go to 2 wonderful schools that fully incorporate what I call the learning environment. It is not the set curriculum that I think you and I grew up with in the good old days of Britain. And here's a true fact, which my wife has never really understood, is when I was 11, I had to choose in England between English language and English literature. Right? Yeah. I'd never read Shakespeare because I chose English language. Isn't that terrible? I gave up art and all those practical skills at the age of 11 as well. And the UK is so driven by specialization, whereas the future is you have to understand what's going on. And I must say the greatest thing I see now is at my age, I'm learning more than I've ever learned before. I'm learning from young people. I think everyone talks about millennials, but the generation we should be really excited about is the Gen Zers. This is a generation who really want to help the world. This is a generation who believe in purpose. This is a generation who, based on my kids, work hard. I think it's very exciting that in 20 years, they'll be the leaders of the world.
So not to sound cynical or skeptical in any way, but when we've had top entrepreneurs...
I've got a clap for that.
Yeah, I think someone was slapping themselves awake. So if we look at the people we've had come up and tell of their experiences and give their kind of nuggets of wisdom, is that all starting to become redundant because of the way the world is changing so fast? I mean, taking journalism into consideration, for example, almost all my experiences would be, certainly in technology, would be totally useless because it's all changed completely since I joined the world of journalism. Maybe the skill sets in interviewing, even those have perhaps gone because everyone's become very partisan. How much is old experience and information, if we want to think of it that way, becoming redundant?
No, that's a great question. No one's ever asked me that before, so that's a good one. So that gives me time to think. You see, I think the key thing is there are lots of skills, and I think you learn bad experiences. You should learn from the mistakes of the past. And one of the great benefits I've had of working over 50 years is I've had a lot of bad experiences. I've made a lot of mistakes. Blockbuster was a time that really was, in many ways, very fortunate for me because I actually left when Blockbuster was going well. And then we were following the internet path. We were fighting back against Netflix. And then Carl Icahn, an activist shareholder, came in and kind of destroyed that vision. And that's why Blockbuster failed. I mean, you can put it down to one person, and you can write that down, and it irritates him every time I say that. But the point is, you learn from bad experiences. I mean, give you an example. When I was at Blockbuster, I had a boss who came in from Walmart. And he once said to me, Nigel, why are you agonizing over Germany? I said, well, I want to build it. It's never going to be successful. And he said, sometimes you have to kill your own babies. A dreadful phrase, but true. So I think past experiences are very important. You then have to update it, but some skills are still very relevant. Going back to your point about journalism, and when I was 8, I wanted to be a journalist. I think the skill of questioning is one of those soft skills we all need to incorporate. And in my book, The Challenge Culture, we talk a lot about the fact that you've got to ask great questions all the time. I mean, the fact you made me think is really added value because it's constantly thinking about the way forward. One of the benefits of being a board director is asking great questions. It's not about showing how bright you are. It's about making the business think about where they're going and how they are doing. So the question why, again, linking back to the previous presentation, is a theme that goes right through my book. And I think that is a skill that goes from 50 years ago right up to the present.
So let's use the last couple of minutes we've got, perhaps offering some words of wisdom. What would your advice be to the young entrepreneurs here?
Well, the first thing I always say to young people, and I do a lot of mentoring, is too many people worry about their next job. The simple advice is be good today. If you're good today, the next job will come. The second piece of advice is be flexible. And I think that is completely consistent with everything that we've heard in the last hour. The world is going to change. Jobs that will be great jobs in 10 years do not exist anymore. And I did a commencement speech for another university back in June, and that was the whole theme of my presentation, that the future jobs do not exist today. And I think, I'm really excited about the future of work. I think work's going to get even more exciting. I'd be putting my hand up to go back in the workplace as long as I don't have to go to work every day. To me, and commuting, I live at home now. I work from home. I get up in the morning. I sit there in my sports shorts and shirt. I don't have to dress to go to work. I don't have to get in the car and get frustrated by sitting in the car and causing all kinds of pollution. I have a Tesla, so I don't cause pollution anyway. But anyway, but the point is, that is such a rigid, ridiculous way of working. Yes, you need to come together once or twice a week, but I think people have to think very flexibly and I'm absolutely convinced, and I'm not, pushing Babson as a commercial. I think places like this, and indeed where my son goes, which is Beaver Country Day, not far away, and my daughter goes, which is Charles River School, they are about total learning. They're about how the curriculum changes every year to respond to different needs. True fact, when I did history at school, I did it in the early 60s. We didn't look at any history past 1918. Never even studied the Second World War. That is ridiculous. Right. So I think keeping flexible is my big advice.
Well, so I'd promised everyone at the beginning a straight-talking Brit, tells it as it is, which I really enjoy these kind of interviews. I don't get, as I say, as a journalist, I'm always having to weave through the politicians' clouds. But I had one, it reminds me of an interview I did with Desmond Tutu, Archbishop Tutu, and I bumped into him actually at the UN a couple of years ago in an elevator, so he was kind of trapped with me. But I said to him, Archbishop Tutu, you said one of the most diplomatic things I ever heard on my show when I last interviewed you. And he said, "What was that?" And now I didn't impersonate him to himself in the elevator because his family was with him, but he said on my show, "Thank God I am not God. Otherwise, I would have to say Osama bin Laden and George Bush are both my children." So he laughed, and I said, "But apparently you're not so diplomatic when you were interviewed by a journalist who discovered you'd been married 50 years. And the journalist said, Archbishop Tutu, you've been married 50 years, that's a long time. In all those years, have you ever contemplated divorce? He said, divorce, never. But murder? Round of applause, Nigel Travis, please. Thank you very much. Real pleasure.